The Boy in the Mist. At 4:37 a.m., the streets of Edison Valley were thick with a creeping mist, wrapping every street lamp and mailbox in silence. The world was asleep, except for one boy, walking. 12-year-old Zion Ward moved like a ghost down the cracked sidewalk, the oversized hoodie he wore doing little to guard against the bitter wind that whipped through the early morning. His breath came in quick clouds, white puffs dissolving into the air as he walked with purpose. Fast, rhythmic, and silent. Every few steps he winced. His left shoe had a hole in the sole. His right one had no laces. And yet, he never stopped. His school was 20 miles away. Not 20 minutes. 20 miles. Through industrial zones, under frozen bridges, past alleys that stank of beer and cigarette ash, through gang turf marked in spray paint, through places where stray dogs roamed in packs. But Zion walked anyway. Every single day. He didn't have a choice. And someone had noticed. A man watching from a patrol car. Officer Declan Hayes, 38, sat in silence on the edge of an abandoned lot, coffee forgotten in the holder. He'd been watching the same thing every morning for 3 weeks. The same boy, same hoodie, same limp, same backpack that looked far too light. He hadn't stopped him. Not yet. Not because he didn't care, but because he couldn't explain what he was seeing. A kid walking 20 miles. Alone. In this weather. Not once. Every single day. At first, Hayes thought the boy was skipping school, maybe sneaking off to steal or cause trouble. But when he followed from a distance the first time, he saw Zion go all the way. From the edge of town, through factory zones, to the far side of the city, straight to Brook Ridge Middle School. He didn't ask for a ride, didn't hitchhike, didn't even stop to rest. He just walked. Now on this gray morning, something was different. The limp was worse. Hayes watched the boy trip and nearly fall into the gutter. Zion steadied himself on a signpost, clutched his side, and then, quietly, kept walking. That's when Hayes made a decision. He turned the key in the ignition, put the patrol car in drive, and slowly began to follow. He didn't put the lights on, didn't call out. He just stayed behind. Zion didn't look back once. But Hayes' eyes were locked on him. Every detail. The way the boy shivered. The way his sweatshirt was damp and clinging to his frame. The way he kept glancing at his wrist, even though he wore no watch. He was on a schedule. But for who? And why? The real story hadn't even started yet. Zion ducked into an alley shortcut between 2 abandoned buildings. Hayes knew the area well. He used to do narcotics patrol here years ago. It was a maze of broken fences, rusted barrels, and shattered glass, a place no kid should walk through alone. And yet Zion moved through it like he'd been born there. Like he had no fear. Or maybe he just didn't have the luxury of fear anymore. Hayes followed slowly in his cruiser, headlights off. He didn't want to spook the boy. Not yet. He needed to know why. Another 20 minutes passed. Zion crossed train tracks. The sky began to lighten into a dim blue. Hayes glanced at the odometer. He'd driven just under 11 miles. Zion had walked that. On foot. Before sunrise. Hayes was about to roll his window down when he saw the boy slip on a patch of black ice. Zion hit the pavement hard, hands scraping against the asphalt. The sound was faint, but Hayes felt it like a gut punch. Still, the boy didn't cry, didn't curse, didn't sit there in pain. He stood up, shook off the blood, and kept going. That was it. Hayes pulled up slowly behind him, rolled the window down. Hey. Zion flinched, stopped, but didn't turn around. Hayes softened his voice. You all right, kid? Zion didn't speak, just adjusted his backpack and started walking again. Hayes coasted beside him. I'm Officer Hayes. Been watching you walk this route. That's a long way for school, isn't it? Still, no reply. Hayes noticed how thin the boy looked. His shoes were falling apart. His jeans were soaked at the knees. "You hungry?" Hayes asked. "I got some granola bars in the car." Zion stopped, turned his head just slightly, then shook it once. "No, thank you." It was the first time Hayes heard his voice. Polite, controlled, exhausted. "You got a bus pass?" "No." "Parents?" "Don't live with them." That stopped Hayes. He switched off the engine. Put the car in park. Zion didn't run, didn't move, just stood there on the edge of the road like a soldier at attention. "Look," Hayes said carefully, "I'm not here to get you in trouble. I just want to understand what's going on." Zion finally looked at him. Dark brown eyes. Quiet. Observant. But not afraid. Hayes realized then. This boy didn't know how to be afraid anymore. Zion said, "If I'm late to school again, they'll suspend me." Hayes blinked. "Suspend you? I missed too many days last year. If I miss one more, I lose my scholarship." "Scholarship?" Hayes echoed. "Free lunch, after-school tutoring, library access." Zion's voice was calm, like he was reciting a grocery list. "They told me if I missed again, they'd give my spot to someone else. So I walk, every day." Hayes felt like the ground tilted beneath him. All this for a meal, a warm building, a chance. The officer's jaw tightened. "Where do you live?" Zion hesitated, then pointed. "Other side of Edison. Willow Glen Trailer Park." Hayes knew it. That was 20 miles away. Exactly. "You got guardians?" Zion gave a small nod. "My uncle. But he works night shifts. Can't drive me." "And no bus." Zion shrugged. Hayes didn't believe that for a second. He saw the way the boy avoided his eyes, the way his shoulders tensed at the mention of his uncle. Something wasn't right. Not even close. But Zion was already walking again. "I need to go," he said softly. "Bell rings in 22 minutes." Hayes stared after him. 22 minutes. 4 miles to go. On foot. In soaked shoes, bleeding hands, empty stomach. And still, Zion moved. Not because he wanted to, but because if he didn't, he might not eat that day. He might not have a place to study. He might lose the one thing that gave him hope. Hayes swallowed hard and whispered to himself, "What kind of world do we live in, where a kid has to bleed just to get to school?" A lunch tray and a locked door. The cafeteria at Brookridge Middle School buzzed with lunchtime noise. Trays clattered, students joked and laughed, and the smell of warmed-over spaghetti and cafeteria pizza filled the air. But at a corner table near the back wall, Zion Ward sat alone. His tray was nearly empty, just a carton of milk and a scoop of green beans, which he hadn't touched. No main meal, no dessert, no fruit. He had arrived too late again. The lunch lady, Ms. Marla, had frowned when she saw him arrive. She'd already started closing the hot food line. "Zion, baby, you know the rules," she whispered, guilt tugging at her face. "I can't keep holding food past 12:30. They count everything now." "I know," Zion said softly, not meeting her eyes. She sighed and gave him what she could. Milk. Green beans. It was more than he'd expected. Zion took his tray to the farthest corner of the room, sat down quietly, and tried to make the green beans last, one forkful at a time, chewing slowly, pretending he wasn't starving. Across the room, kids laughed and talked about things Zion couldn't relate to. Field trips, video games, weekend plans. He hadn't had a weekend in a long time. His uncle, Reese, worked nights and slept all day. If Zion made noise, he paid for it. If he missed a chore, he paid for it. If he said the wrong thing, he paid for it. So Zion walked 20 miles a day for school, and came home to silence and locked cabinets. Elsewhere that same afternoon, Officer Declan Hayes sat in the faculty lounge of Brookridge Middle, nursing a cup of vending machine coffee that tasted like burned socks. He wasn't here on official business, but no one questioned a uniformed officer with a badge. He was waiting for someone. Mr. Hayes. A soft voice pulled his attention. It was Mrs. Eliza Grant, Zion's 7th grade science teacher. She had soft graying hair pulled into a bun and glasses that always slipped down her nose when she got excited during lectures. She looked worried now. "I got your message," she said, sitting across from him. "You said it was about Zion." Hayes nodded. "I've been watching him walk to school every morning from across town." She blinked. "Walk? He doesn't take the bus. He doesn't take anything," Hayes said. "He walks 20 miles. Alone." Mrs. Grant looked stunned. Her lips parted in shock, and then slowly her eyes filled with tears. "He's always late. I thought he was just slow in the mornings. I've marked him tardy so many times." She shook her head, furious at herself. "But he never complains. He always says sorry. Never an excuse. Never once." Hayes leaned forward. "Has he ever talked about home?" She hesitated. "Bits and pieces. Said he lives with an uncle. But every time I ask more, he shuts down." "Have you noticed anything strange? Clothes, injuries, behavior?" Mrs. Grant looked pained. "He flinches when people raise their voices. Sometimes when someone claps too loud, he ducks like he's expecting to be hit. He's respectful to a fault. Quiet. Keeps to himself." Hayes wrote all of this down. "His grades." "Good," she said immediately. "Very good. He's smart. One of the sharpest I've ever had. But tired. Always tired." There was silence for a moment. Then Hayes asked, "Would you be willing to write a statement?" Mrs. Grant didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." That evening, Zion returned to the trailer just after 5 p.m. The sun had already dipped behind the distant hills, and the air was colder now. His hoodie was still damp from the morning mist. His socks were wet through the holes in his shoes. He quietly pushed open the front door and slipped inside. The trailer was dark, except for the dim flicker of a TV in the living room. On the couch, his Uncle Reese lay sprawled, snoring softly. Empty beer cans littered the floor. The ashtray on the side table was full. The heater wasn't on. Zion's breath came out in visible puffs. He stepped carefully over a beer bottle and headed to the kitchen. The fridge was locked. It always was. A thick padlock kept him out. The cabinet doors were chained shut too. Reese had made sure of that. Zion opened a drawer where he kept his schoolwork. He pulled out a package of saltines he'd saved from the school nurse's office 2 weeks ago. It was stale, crushed, and dusty, but it was something. He took the crackers back to his tiny room at the end of the hall. There was no door, just a curtain. No bed, just a mattress on the floor. Zion sat down, leaned his backpack against the wall, and pulled out his only notebook. He still had homework, still had things to learn. Because if he failed, he'd lose his tutoring spot. If he lost that, everything else went too. So Zion ate crackers with one hand and solved math problems with the other. That's when he heard the knock. Not a loud one, not a pounding one, but a knock on the trailer door. Zion froze. Then he heard the voice. "Zion, it's Officer Hayes." Reese stirred on the couch, grunted, sat up. "Who the hell?" Zion's heart stopped. Reese staggered to the door, pulled it open, and squinted. Hayes stood there, calm but firm. "Evening, Mr. Ward. Can I come in? Got a warrant?" "No, just some questions about your nephew." Reese scowled. "He in trouble?" "No," Hayes said. "Not yet." He took a step forward. Reese blocked the doorway. "Then he ain't got nothing to say." From the hallway, Zion listened. His legs shook. Reese's voice was lower now. "He already eats up my check. What more you want?" Hayes didn't blink. How come he walks 20 miles to school every day? Reese snorted. He likes the walk. Says it helps him think. Hayes stared at him. Neither moved. Then Hayes said quietly, "If I find out you're lying, Mr. Ward, it won't end well for you." Reese slammed the door. Zion scrambled back into his room. His heart raced. His hands shook. He waited for the slap, the yell, the punishment. But none came. Not tonight. Instead, he lay down on his mattress, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a long time, someone had knocked. Not to hurt, not to take, but to ask. Later that night, in his cruiser, Hayes sat reviewing files under the glow of the dashboard light. He had everything he needed to open a report. Testimony from teachers. Visual confirmation of Zion's daily walk. Notes from the school nurse about repeated signs of fatigue and hunger. Footage from his dashcam of Zion walking near the highway. But he needed more. He needed Zion to speak, because the system, corrupt and cautious, wouldn't move without the child saying something first. And Hayes knew kids like Zion didn't speak easily, not because they didn't want to, but because the cost of speaking was often higher than the cost of staying silent. The next day, Zion was late again. When he arrived, the school security officer stopped him at the gate. Office. Now. He was used to it by now. He walked into the front office, where Principal Ms. Conway waited. Her eyes were sharp behind her square glasses. "You've been late 6 times this month, Zion." "Yes, Mom." No note. No parent calls. No bus pass. "I know." She studied him. "You have one more late arrival before you're suspended. You understand that?" Zion nodded. "I don't want to do this, Zion," she said more gently. "But there are rules." He opened his mouth, then closed it. What could he say? "My uncle doesn't feed me. I walk 20 miles every day. I'm starving and tired and alone." No one would believe it. They never had before. So he said what he always said. "I understand." That afternoon, Hayes waited. He parked his cruiser at the edge of the school lot. He waited until the final bell rang, until the kids burst out of the building, laughing and chatting, until the buses left, and until Zion appeared, walking, backpack light, head down, heading for home. Hayes drove alongside him slowly, then parked and stepped out. "Zion." The boy stopped. "I can't make you talk," Hayes said, "but I want you to know, I see you." Zion looked up. "I see what you're doing, and how hard you're fighting, and I'm not walking away." The boy's eyes shimmered, just a little, but then he nodded, only once, and kept walking. The notebook that broke the silence. The rain started just after 4 a.m., not a soft drizzle, but a cold, relentless downpour that soaked the streets of Edison Valley in seconds. Officer Declan Hayes sat in his cruiser, windshield wipers dragging rhythmically across the glass, eyes fixed on the familiar curve of Willow Glen's trailer park entrance. He'd been there for 20 minutes, watching, waiting. He knew Zion wouldn't stay home, not just because he was disciplined, but because he couldn't afford to. School meant food. School meant heat. School meant survival. And sure enough, there he was, a thin shadow in the rain. Zion Ward emerged from the trailer, hoodie pulled tight, no umbrella, backpack strapped on, feet splashing through puddles in shoes that weren't made for anything wetter than dust. Hayes swallowed hard. He turned on his headlights, flashed them once, not as a warning, but an offer. Zion stopped, just for a second, then turned his head. His eyes locked with Hayes through the mist. And for the first time in nearly 4 weeks, Zion walked toward the cruiser. Hayes reached across and pushed the passenger door open. Zion climbed in silently, water dripping from every inch of him. Hayes handed him a towel from the back seat. "It's clean. Promise." Zion nodded and took it with quiet hands. No words. Just trust. A small, cautious spark of it. Hayes pulled away from the curb. Neither of them spoke for the first few minutes. The rain tapped against the windows like an impatient drummer. Then Hayes asked gently, "You eat last night?" Zion hesitated. Then, 2 crackers. Hayes nodded slowly. He didn't ask any more. Instead, he reached into a brown paper bag beside his seat and pulled out a wrapped breakfast sandwich. He offered it without a word. Zion stared at it like it was made of gold, then took it with both hands. Still, he didn't eat. He just held it, warming his fingers. Hayes didn't press him. The boy had learned that food could be taken at any moment, that it wasn't safe until it was earned. Hayes knew the look. He'd seen it overseas when he was a Marine, in war zones, except this kid hadn't been to war. He was growing up in Edison Valley. Later that morning, in room 203, Zion arrived dry and fed, for the first time in days. Mrs. Grant noticed immediately. She smiled at him, a real one. "Good morning, Mr. Ward." Zion gave a small nod. "Morning." He slid into his desk as class began. The lesson was on the water cycle. Evaporation, condensation, precipitation. Zion barely heard any of it. His mind was on something else. Or rather, someone. Officer Hayes. Why was he doing this? Zion had learned not to trust adults who came around too often, because they always left. But this one hadn't. Yet. At lunchtime, Zion approached the lunch counter, expecting the same scraps. But Ms. Marla, the cafeteria worker, smiled brightly. "Got something hot for you today, sugar." Zion blinked. A full tray sat there, mac and cheese, broccoli, cornbread, and a banana. His eyes widened. "But, I thought." She winked. "Officer Hayes called early this morning. Said you were on your way." She leaned in, lowering her voice. "Said to make sure we feed you first, not last." Zion's throat went tight. He didn't know what to say. So he just whispered, "Thank you." Meanwhile, at the Edison Valley Police Station, Officer Hayes stared at his screen. Photos of Zion's walk route lined his monitor. The broken sidewalk outside the old paint factory. The narrow shoulder near the overpass, where cars passed just inches from the edge. The boarded-up alley shortcut Zion used to avoid gangs. And then, the photo Hayes couldn't stop staring at. Zion's sneakers. They were falling apart. Literally. The soles had peeled half off. The fabric was frayed. There were holes at the toes. Hayes opened a tab. Size 6. Boys. Waterproof. He added them to his cart. Then another pair, warm boots for winter. He clicked purchase, then turned to his notes. He wasn't just building a case anymore. He was building a timeline. A story. One the court couldn't ignore. 2 days later, Zion walked into the classroom and found a package on his desk, wrapped in brown paper, his name written in black marker. He froze. Students stared. "What is it?" someone asked. Zion didn't answer. He just stared at it. He'd never gotten a gift before. Ever. Mrs. Grant stepped over. "It's from someone who wants you to walk safer." Zion opened it slowly. Inside, a new pair of black waterproof sneakers. Wool socks. A handwritten note. "These won't take away the miles, but maybe they'll make each one hurt a little less. D." Zion stared at the shoes. He blinked hard. No one said a word. He put them on. They fit. Perfectly. That night, after school, Zion sat in his room, the one with no door and a thin mattress, and he opened his notebook. He wrote for the first time, not homework, not math or science. He wrote a letter, not to a person, to no one, and everyone. "There's a box in my uncle's room where he keeps mail addressed to me. I found it once when I was cleaning. It had 6 letters from a church I used to go to. One from the state about medical insurance, one from a food assistance program. He never gave me any of them. I've learned not to speak unless someone asks, and even then, say less. Because if you say too much, people start looking at you like you're broken. But sometimes, I wish someone would ask the right question. Like, why don't you ever eat lunch? Why do you walk alone every day? Why do your shoes look like that? Why do you flinch when someone shuts a locker too hard? Maybe one day, I'll give this notebook to someone who cares. The next morning, Zion handed the notebook to Officer Hayes before getting in the cruiser. Hayes looked at him, surprised. Zion shrugged. You asked what was going on. This is all I got. Hayes didn't read it right away. He waited until Zion went inside the school. Then he flipped open the cover and started reading. 10 pages in, his hands began to shake. By page 15, his eyes stung. By page 20, he was crying. Right there in the driver's seat of a patrol car, just after sunrise. Tears slid down his face, not because of what was in the notebook, but because someone so young had lived so much pain. And yet, still walked, still tried, still hoped. Zion had written down the hours he went without food, the days he was locked in his room for disobedience, the punishments that weren't physical, but just as cruel. Locked fridge, no heat, being told you're lucky to be here. Hayes didn't wipe the tears away. He let them fall. Then he picked up his radio and called in backup. The lie they sold and the truth he lived. The refrigerator hasn't worked in 3 months. That's what Zion's notebook said on page 23. Officer Declan Hayes sat in the corner of the Children's Advocacy Office, the boy's small spiral-bound notebook resting open in his lap. He'd read it 3 times. Every word felt like a brick in his chest. That line about the refrigerator hit differently. It wasn't broken, not in the literal sense. The fridge at Zion's home worked fine. It was just locked, with a chain and a padlock. Because in that house, hunger wasn't an accident. It was a weapon. One Zion had learned to tiptoe around, like every other trap laid out to keep him small. And now Hayes had evidence. Real evidence. But evidence wasn't always enough. Not in this city. Not with Reese Ward's spotless file and smooth lies. Later that afternoon, Hayes sat across from Darla Kendrick, Zion's assigned caseworker from Family Protective Services. She looked overwhelmed and underpaid. Dark bags under her eyes and files stacked high on her cluttered desk. Hayes placed the notebook on top of the pile. She raised an eyebrow. What's this? His story, Hayes said, in his own words. She opened the cover and read the first paragraph. Then the second. By the 5th, her shoulders had slumped. Hayes leaned in. I need a wellness check. Tonight. With backup. Kendrick hesitated. We've been out there before. His uncle had paperwork, food in the fridge, school records, medical forms. Everything looked too perfect. Hayes asked. Exactly. He's playing the system. But Zion's writing. This isn't imagination. You know it. She nodded slowly. I'll file it under emergency review, she said. We'll have to coordinate with the department. I can't go in without legal clearance. Hayes stood. Then let's get it. That evening, 5:52 p.m., Zion sat at the kitchen table in silence. A cold can of beans sat unopened in front of him. His uncle, Reese, stood by the sink, drinking the last of a warm beer. You think that cop cares about you? Reese sneered. Jin didn't answer. He'd learned silence was safer than truth. I saw him outside again, always watching, like you're some lost puppy. Still, Zion didn't speak, but his fingers tightened around the fork in his lap. Reese stepped closer. If he shows up here again, you better remember who feeds you, who lets you live here. Zion's voice was quiet, but it cut like a blade. You don't feed me. Reese froze. Zion had never talked back. Never once. Reese's eyes narrowed. What did you just say? The air thickened. The tension was a living thing. Zion stood up slowly. "I'm not scared of you anymore," he whispered. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He didn't run. He just said it. And that's when the knock came. 3 sharp raps at the front door. Reese turned, his hand clenched into a fist. "Don't move." Zion didn't move. But he stared at the door like it was a portal. Like if it opened, maybe this time, things would change. Reese yanked the door open. Officer Hayes stood there, flanked by a second officer and Darla Kendrick. "Mr. Ward," Hayes said flatly, "we're conducting an emergency welfare check on your nephew." Reese tried to block the doorway. "You can't just." "I have a court order," Kendrick said, stepping forward with a file. "And we're not leaving without talking to Zion," Hayes added, taking a step closer. Behind them, Zion appeared in the hallway. His eyes met Hayes. He didn't smile, didn't speak, but he nodded. Just once. The silent answer. "I'm ready." Inside the trailer, the visit turned into something more. Kendrick began snapping photos. Locked fridge, chained cabinets, mattress with no blankets, torn shoes in the corner, empty food pantry. Zion sat quietly while they worked. He said nothing, but he didn't have to. His silence spoke louder than words. Reese paced, grumbling. "He's lying. He likes the attention." Kendrick didn't even look up. "We'll be placing him in temporary protective custody tonight, until further investigation. You people are insane. He's my responsibility." "No," Hayes said, standing in front of Zion. "You gave up that right the moment you treated him like a prisoner." Reese raised his hand. "You think you can just take?" Hayes didn't flinch. "You lay one finger on him now. I swear to God, I'll cuff you so fast your feet won't touch the ground." Reese looked at Zion, his lip curled in disgust. "You'll be back," he spat. "Kids like you always come back." Zion stood still. But inside, something shifted. For the first time, he realized he wasn't going back. That night, Zion lay in a real bed, a warm one, in a safe room at the Hope Haven shelter, a temporary home for displaced kids. The staff had given him clean pajamas, warm socks, and a blanket that smelled like lavender detergent. He had eaten a hot meal, chicken, rice, and vegetables, and had a second helping of cornbread when he thought no one was watching. Now he stared up at the ceiling. Not scared, not cold, just unsure. Officer Hayes had dropped him off with a promise. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. Zion didn't know what that meant yet, but he hoped, maybe for the first time in his life, that it was true. 3 days later, the court date was set. The hollow smile Reese wore in his mugshot didn't match the rage in his arrest report. Charges were pending. But now came the hard part. Custody. The state had no family to place Zion with. His mother had died 5 years earlier. His father was listed as unknown. The few relatives on file either couldn't be found or didn't want to be. And so Zion waited. Not in fear this time, but in limbo. One afternoon, Mrs. Grant visited the shelter. She brought a bag of school supplies, books, a new spiral notebook, a warm scarf she said her grandmother used to wear. "I thought you might like it," she said awkwardly. Zion held the scarf gently, then whispered, "I do." She smiled. "You're stronger than most grown men I know." He looked at her, then asked, "Will I ever go back to a real family?" Mrs. Grant's eyes welled. "I don't know, but there are people trying to make sure you don't have to go back to the wrong one." That night, Hayes came back. Not in uniform. Just jeans, boots, and a hoodie. He knocked on the shelter's door, holding a small paper bag. Zion met him in the hallway. They walked outside, sat on the bench under the porch light. Hayes handed him the bag. Zion peeked inside. A small leather-bound journal. On the front, in gold letters, You're still alright, matters. Zion held it with both hands. I thought you might want to keep writing, Hayes said. That notebook you gave me, it changed things. It helped people see the truth. Zion opened the journal slowly. The pages were blank, crisp, clean. Waiting. You're not just surviving anymore, Hayes said. You're beginning. Zion didn't cry. He didn't need to. He just smiled. For real this time. And that was more powerful than tears. The boy who was never chosen. Until now. The courtroom was colder than Zion expected. Not just in temperature, but in tone. He sat at the long wooden table, his small hands folded tightly in his lap, knees barely touching the floor from the chair. His new shoes, courtesy of Officer Hayes, were clean, but they couldn't stop the quiet tap of his nervous foot against the floor. Across from him sat his uncle, Reese Ward, in a borrowed suit jacket, lips pursed and expression blank. He looked more like a businessman than the man who'd once locked a child out of the house during a snowstorm because he needed to learn consequences. Zion's eyes dropped to the journal in his lap. The words, "You're still matters," shone faintly beneath the dim courtroom lights. Judge Melrose sat at the bench, stern, deliberate, and known for being impossible to sway without facts. Everyone said she was fair, but Zion had learned fairness didn't always look like kindness. Next to Zion sat his caseworker, Ms. Darla Kendrick, and the child advocate attorney assigned to him. Mr. Lowell, a thin man with round glasses and a voice that never raised, not even when it should have. On Reese's side, his private lawyer. They had arrived with boxes of documents, medical forms, school records, bank statements, even grocery receipts. And on the record, it all looked clean. Too clean. That was the problem. Mr. Ward, do you believe you've provided adequate care for your nephew over the past 2 years? The judge asked. Reese adjusted his tie and nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I've done my best. It wasn't always easy, but I provided food, shelter, school access. I even had him in therapy for a while. Zion's mouth went dry. Therapy. The only sessions he ever had were ones his uncle faked, signing papers and saying they'd gone. Zion had never spoken to a real counselor until Officer Hayes brought him to the shelter. And why do you think Zion is making these allegations against you? Judge Melrose asked. Reese didn't even blink. Honestly, Your Honor, I think he's confused. Influenced. He's had a tough life. Maybe he's misinterpreted tough love as abuse. But I'd never harm him. Ever. Zion's hands clenched tighter. That was how it always went. Adults said the right words, and kids like him just looked angry or sad. And nobody wanted to believe the angry, sad kid. Then it was Zion's turn. He was asked to take the stand. He hadn't prepared for this. No speech. No script. The bailiff helped him up. The chair at the front of the courtroom was too big. His feet dangled. The judge looked at him gently. Zion, you understand that telling the truth is important today, right? He nodded. Good, she said. Then I want you to tell me, in your own words, what your life with Mr. Ward has been like. Zion opened his mouth, and nothing came out. His throat was tight. The words were there, but they were stuck. Trapped behind fear, behind the years of silence, behind every time he'd been punished for speaking. The judge waited. Everyone waited. Then, quietly, Zion said, May I read something? Of course, the judge said. Zion opened his journal. He flipped to the page he'd written last night, by flashlight under a warm blanket in the shelter. And he read, I used to think being a kid meant waiting. Waiting for food. Waiting for someone to ask if you were okay. Waiting for the bruises to fade, even if they were on the inside. Waiting for someone to pick you, like in dodgeball, or adoption, or just life. But nobody ever picked me. I was just the kid who kept walking. Because walking meant I got to eat at school. And sometimes walking meant I didn't have to hear the yelling. And I got good at it. So good, nobody even noticed what I was running from. He looked up from the journal, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, everyone was listening. Zion continued. He locked the fridge, said I was costing him too much. He took the school lunch money and spent it on beer. I know this because I saw the receipts. He said, "You should be grateful you even have a floor to sleep on." And sometimes I believed him, because when nobody fights for you, you start thinking maybe they're right. He closed the journal gently. I don't want to go back. His voice didn't tremble. His body did. But his voice stayed strong. I just want a chance. A real one. There was silence. Even the judge didn't speak right away. Then Officer Hayes stood up. "May I address the court?" he asked. The judge nodded. He walked to the front and pulled out a small folder. "I'm not a social worker. I'm not a teacher. I'm not a counselor," Hayes said. "But I've watched this boy walk 20 miles every day. Rain, snow, heat, you name it." He looked over at Zion. "And I've watched him do it without asking for anything." He opened the folder and handed the judge several photographs. Photos of his shoes, before and after. Photos of the chained fridge, the mattress on the floor, the locked pantry. And this. He held up Zion's first notebook. "This is the story he wrote when nobody else was listening." Hayes took a breath. "I don't know what your ruling will be, but I know one thing. This boy deserves more than survival. He deserves a chance to grow, to dream, to feel safe." Another pause. Then Hayes added, "And if nobody else wants him, I do." The courtroom gasped. Even Zion's eyes widened. The judge blinked. "You're requesting custody?" Hayes nodded. "I filed a petition. I know I'm not perfect. I work long hours. I live alone. But I've been watching this kid fight to stay standing, and I'm telling you, he's done more with nothing than most people do with everything. He deserves someone who won't look away." Zion stared at him, like maybe he was dreaming. And for the first time in his life, maybe he didn't have to walk alone anymore. That night, Zion stood outside the courtroom, still holding the journal tight in his hands. Hayes stepped beside him, not saying anything at first. Then, "You okay?" Zion looked up. "You really meant it. What you said. Every word." Zion lowered his voice, even the part about keeping me. Hayes smiled. "I didn't say keep. I said fight for. And yeah, that means if you want, I'm here. For good." Zion looked down at his journal, then handed it to Hayes. "Can you hold this?" "Why?" Hayes asked. "Because I want to walk home with empty hands," Zion said. "For once." Hayes didn't cry, but he came close. He took the journal, placed it gently in his pocket, and the two of them walked. Not 20 miles, just the 10 steps to the car. But it felt longer and heavier. Because this time, Zion wasn't walking alone. He never asked for a hero, but one came anyway. 2 weeks later, the air smelled different. Zion didn't have the words to describe it yet. It wasn't the stale, heavy air of the trailer. It wasn't the sharp cold that came with locked windows and silence. It wasn't even the crisp air from his 20-mile morning walks to school. This air smelled like bread in the oven and lemon dish soap, and something soft, something warm. Home. He stood in the doorway of Officer Hayes' small one-story house, holding a paper bag of clothes and books donated by the shelter. It didn't look like much from the outside. But Zion had already learned. Sometimes, the smallest places hold the biggest safety. "This is your room," Hayes said. Zion stepped inside. There was a bed, a real one, with a thick mattress and a comforter so fluffy he didn't know where the bed ended and the cloud began. There was a desk, a lamp, a small bookshelf with space left open, like someone expected him to add to it. Zion touched the edge of the blanket like it might disappear. "You okay?" Hayes asked. Zion nodded slowly. Yeah, it's just. He searched for the word, then whispered, strange. Hayes smiled. Strange good. Zion thought about it, then gave the smallest smile. Yeah. That night, Zion lay awake, not because he was scared, but because he didn't know what to do with peace. There were no footsteps in the hall, no fridge chains, no creaking floorboards warning him of anger coming, just the hum of a ceiling fan and the soft rhythm of a dog snoring from the living room. Diesel, Officer Hayes' old retired K9, had taken an instant liking to Zion. And Zion, though hesitant at first, found himself sitting with Diesel more than with anyone else. Sometimes he spoke to him when Hayes wasn't around. I'm not used to people staying, Zion whispered to the dog one night. But maybe that's changing. Diesel snored louder. Zion took it as agreement. Monday morning, Zion walked into school with his head higher than it had ever been. He didn't arrive late. He didn't walk 20 miles. He didn't smell like rain or sweat or fear. He came in a car, with a packed lunch in his backpack and clean clothes on his back. Mrs. Grant noticed immediately. New hoodie? She asked. Zion grinned. It's soft, too. She smiled. You look like you finally got some sleep. Zion nodded. I did. Good, she said. Then, more softly, you deserve it. 3 days later, the judge made it official. The petition for temporary guardianship was approved. It was the first time Zion had ever seen Officer Hayes nervous. He wore a tie that didn't quite match his shirt. His boots were polished, but scuffed at the edges. He held his hands behind his back, like he was standing in front of a drill sergeant. When the judge said the words, I hereby grant Officer Declan Hayes temporary custody of Zion Ward, pending final review, Hayes let out a breath like he'd been holding it for a year. Zion stood still. He didn't cry. He didn't jump up. He just walked over and hugged the man around the waist. And Hayes, stiff and awkward at first, wrapped his arms around the boy. Firm, fierce, like someone who didn't intend to let go. Weeks passed. Zion learned to cook eggs. He burned toast. Twice. He got a library card and borrowed 3 books at once, just because he could. He walked Diesel to the park, and when people said, "That your dog?" he said, "Sorta. He shares a house with me." He saw a therapist who told him that healing wasn't fast or linear, but that didn't mean he wasn't moving forward. He began writing again. Not just about pain this time. He wrote about trees and dreams and a girl named Tamika who made him laugh at lunch. He laughed now. Not often, but more than before. He no longer jumped at slammed lockers. He no longer flinched when someone raised their voice. He still had nightmares. But now he had someone to wake up to. One rainy afternoon, Zion sat on the couch, flipping through his old spiral notebook, the one Hayes had kept safe in his drawer. Hayes walked in, carrying 2 mugs of hot cocoa. Zion looked up. "Why'd you keep it?" Hayes handed him a mug. "Because it told the truth when no one else would." Zion held the notebook with both hands. "It still scares me." "What does?" "That someone could say it's not real. That it didn't happen." Hayes sat beside him. He didn't say, "It won't happen." He said, "And if they do, I'll remind them who wrote it." Zion didn't respond. But after a moment, he leaned his head gently against Hayes' shoulder. 2 months later, a new family moved in down the street. The couple had a boy about Zion's age, Jalen. He wore oversized headphones and loved basketball. One Saturday, they played on the cracked driveway with a borrowed ball. After the 5th missed shot, Jalen said, "You're quiet, huh?" Zion shrugged, used to be quieter. What changed? Zion didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I got a house where I don't have to be afraid." Jalen dribbled. "That's real," he said. "I like your dog too." Zion grinned. "Diesel's famous around here. On the day of the final hearing, Zion wore a button-up shirt and real dress shoes. He sat between Hayes and Darla Kendrick, who now smiled a little more whenever she saw him. The courtroom wasn't cold this time. The judge read the documents carefully, then looked down at Zion. "You've been through a lot," she said gently. "More than most children your age." Zion didn't flinch. He was used to that sentence. "But your bravery has helped others. And your guardian, Mr. Hayes, has proven he's not just willing, but able, to give you a stable, loving home." She picked up her pen. "Effective today, Officer Declan Hayes is granted full legal guardianship of Zion Ward." The room was quiet. Zion stared at the floor. Then, as Hayes placed a hand on his back, Zion smiled. "I guess I'm not walking alone anymore," he whispered. That evening, they celebrated with pizza. Hayes let him pick the toppings, pineapple and pepperoni, to which Diesel sneezed in protest. As Zion sat on the porch, plate in hand, he stared up at the sky. There was no one watching him from windows. No one waiting to yank him back inside. Just stars. Open air. Freedom. Hayes came out with 2 sodas and sat beside him. "Feels like a beginning," Zion said. Hayes sipped. "It is." "You sure?" Zion asked. "Yeah," Hayes replied. "And whatever comes next, we walk through it together." Zion nodded slowly, then added, "No more 20-mile walks." Hayes laughed. "Unless it's for ice cream." Somewhere in a drawer, tucked safely away, lies a worn notebook. Inside are pages written in pain, in fear, in desperation. But the last page is different. The last page says, "I used to walk 20 miles to school because no one cared. But one man stopped walking away and walked toward me instead. And that changed everything." Zion Ward.